Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2022. And that brings us to that release, which has been designated by Criterion under this Blu-ray for 2022 at spine number 1156. And this is a film which is described as being from the year 2019. And the filmmaker is Jayro Bustamante. And the name of the work is LLORONA. This is the work which is described as being from the year 2019, and it is from the filmmaker Jayro Bustamante. And among its cast, it's a really fascinating cast. We have Maria Mercedes Coroy and Margarita Kenefic and Julio Diaz and others. And this is the work which is La Llorona. And again, please pardon me for my very poor pronunciation of the language. I hope you can forgive me. I am doing my very best with this really fascinating and quite intense film. I think it's oftentimes described as a horror suspense film, and I think it is. It also is described as being almost a reckoning with history, which I think it is. It also is dealing with folklore and folk tales in a way that's also interlinked with the sense of horror and the mysterious and dread and angst and a reckoning with history, which it is, and then some. So many things going on with within this fascinating work from Bustamante, which is La Llorona. And I must say that this was my first time to have the great pleasure of watching this film on the occasion of this Criterion release, and I was I was so overwhelmed by it. It was a very it made quite an impression upon me. And I watched it a number of times, and so what a film this is. Really impressive indeed. I think if we're to try to describe this particular work, I think we can focus in on its presence or the context in terms of Guatemala and how it's trying to reckon with a sense of the history of Guatemala and what we said to be maybe the recent history or historical events of the latter half of the 20th century of Guatemala, specifically in the context of this character, one of the main characters, who is Enrique Monteverde, who is an elderly gentleman, a patriarch of this family that we meet, who is, it's a family of a number of generations, of his generation, of then the generation of their daughter immediately before them, and then their daughter's younger generation then following them as well. So it's a family of multi-generations, and also there is also a sense of class dynamic within this family, because there's also the servants who serve the household as well. And these servants play a very key role because we also understand too that what is consuming a lot of the inner workings of the family, and also by extension what is consuming a lot of the cultural tide of the moment, of the present moment, is the fact that Enrico Monteverde, the patriarch or the head of the household, the elderly head of the household, is also facing public backlash, criticism, as well as trial for his responsibility and role of genocide and killings that took place against indigenous populations, Mayan persons, men, women, and children, during the course of very violent scenarios and situations in the context of the civil war strife that occurred in Guatemala throughout the decades, especially, or perhaps in particular, or by example, during the 1980s, early 1980s. And so we have this elderly figure now standing trial, in essence, for his role and responsibility in the carrying out of these acts of murder and genocide, and his reckoning with these particular quite traumatic and very vicious moments of history. And not just his reckoning with history, but also how how the younger generations are reckoning with this history, either indirectly or directly. And here we have a wonderfully cinematic dialogue that is taking place in the hands of Bustamante and company about the nature and role of persons and citizens trying to deal with a history that can be potentially quite complex and vicious, and indeed quite confrontational, and how younger generations come to learn about this history, come to deal with this history, come to maybe come to terms with this history on their own terms, either if it's in this direct way, for example, in the context of the story of this family in terms of their familial relationships, because of course the very head of the household can be said to have a very direct a responsibility for what has happened. So that's one way in which we see this reckoning of history taking place, or the learning of history taking place. Or perhaps not, because even within the context of this family, you also understand that not all family members maybe are learning or appreciating or having the same sense of history as, say, the people who are outside, who can be said to be directly or indirectly the victims of a lot of these acts of genocide or violence against the people. So, and that's where we get a really interesting conversation about the younger generation, how they come to terms with, or not, as the case may be, of acts that could be said to have taken place years and years prior to them being born. And so, but is there still a responsibility there? And I think the film serves this conversation in a really rich way, and in a way that doesn't necessarily yield one answer or another, but there's a possibility of answers that take place. Now, you bring into the mix here this notion, therefore, of folklore, and also of horror and dread and the unknown. And here, this is where we have this idea of this film also serving as a type of potential ghost story, because there might be figure or figures unknown, things that are happening within the household, things that might be unexplainable or perhaps mysterious, or things that seem actually very frightening because of the fact that they are mysterious or unknowable, that may or may not have to do with certain people that are visiting the household, new members of the household, maybe something of secrets that certain members of the household, either part of this family or the servants, may or may not have some kind of prior knowledge about. We are not sure. Again, this is part of the progression of the film. Who knows what at what time, if at all? And what it is that they do know. Is it something that is of this earth, or is it something that is perhaps beyond our comprehension of what is known as the corporeal, right? Things that are, in other words, ethereal, or perhaps not of this earth, that may or may not have something to do with the proceedings, thus the horror or dread or angst of this film, La Llorona. And we have so many scenes of, say, this dread or angst, or the unreal. Sometimes the phrase magic realism, I think, is used in a lot of or some of the supplements discussions, Bustamante being one. I think it's a really good application, the magic realism, or perhaps another way to put it in a general sense, the unreal. How the unreal, things that are, quote unquote, not part of how we perceive reality to be, how they are depicted in this film, and in a way that is linking to folklore and this figure, this image or concept or story of La Llorona, and what it is La Llorona represents. Because not only is La Llorona this figure, this woman who seems to be like a ghost or specter of some kind of haunted past that has to do with tragedy of death, the deaths of loved ones, the deaths of family members, the deaths of children. how this is a figure not just of folklore and tales to be told of a tragic past of victimization, but also how this aspect of folklore and storytelling is used in a way that is integrated so organically into the actual plot itself. There might be figures or a figure or figures within the plot that could be said to have some kind of link or secret or something to do with the titular La Llorona in question, and how that plays into the further unraveling of the mysteries of this film is fascinating. It's really fascinating. So the way in which folklore and storytelling have to do with the direct plot itself, and also in relation to the way in which this film is on another page dealing with, or attempting to deal, or endeavoring to deal with what could be said to be a reckoning with history, how this figure or this concept or image or metaphor of La Llorona is being used also in a way not just to show victims and victimhood and the tragedy of victimhood, but also to show revenge and justice and the meting out of justice or the seeking of justice against those who have committed acts of injustice. So not only is this image or vision or metaphor or specter that of victimhood, but also it's a way in which victims are trying to claim back their sense of justice, which I think is a really interesting way to add a sense of adapting this aspect of folklore for purposes of this Bustamante work, La Llorona, in a way that is very compelling, very challenging, and very serving a sense of mystery, as well as serving a sense of social critique and commentary, and also serving a sense of how history is to be dealt with by current generations, and that currency is deeply embedded within a sense of national identity and also individual identity, sense of self, as well as how stories and myths and folklore have a sense of the grounded nature that really have a significance and aspect and relevance to present-day events, as shocking as they may be. So this is a full package of a film. It is a horror film. There are scenes that are really viscerally quite shocking and eerie, and they just build and build and build in the sense of this inexorable, in a way that gives a sense of the stillness, but also a sense of the darkness and what lies beneath in such a creepy way. And also gives us a sense, too, of the sweep of history, the reckoning with history, the idea of victims and justice, that idea of generational gaps, how one interprets and absorbs and digests history, and how that digestion may be for the good or not, depending on the particular scenario or character that we meet along the way during this really fascinating work. Again, this is from the year 2019, Jayro Bustamante's work, which is La Llorona. The Criterion Collection has released this film, La Llorona, on this new Blu-ray release. Again, it's spine number 1156. And I have removed, prior to the start of recording this video discussion, I've removed from the inside the fold-out insert. And the reason I've done so now is to speak about the master, as it's described here in such insert, as it states, La Llorona is presented in its original aspect ratio of 2.39 to 1. This film was shot on an Arri Alexa mini camera and completed in a fully digital workflow with a fully digital soundtrack. The 5.1 surround audio for this release was mastered from the original digital audio master files. And so it says also on the back here, it says 2K digital master. So I am, as I've mentioned before, I'm seeing this film for the first time for purposes of this release, and I was very taken with it, and in terms of its overall effect on me, as a sort of a visceral viewing experience, both in terms of visual and sound. And I must say too that it does have a crispness, excuse me, to the lines and the edges, and there's also a way in which colors seem to pop out at specific times, specific instances. There's a particular scene I think of as an example, a very striking example, as in terms of how a veil covering a face of a character that is speaking on screen during a very key moment somewhat early on in the film, how this veil has this specific color to it that stands out, notwithstanding the fact that the background of the room that this character's in is enshrouded in shadow and darkness. It's a very striking image, and I think it's an example of how well this digital photographic technique is being employed here. And it seems to be preserved very well for purposes of this release. So as I say, it is a 2019 film. And so, and I don't have a context for it in terms of seeing it in the theater, unfortunately, but based on how I have reacted to it, again, my own subjective viewing experience, I was very, very pleased with it. And it was, again, showing a type of crispness to the delineation, as well as a preservation of a type of aspect of color and shadow. And those colors pop out at certain precise moments, and the shadows are pronounced in certain precise moments as well, to enhance the sort of psychological effect of the horror of that which is the recollection of history, as well as the cinematic stylings of the horror and the tragedy and the trauma that's at the full display here for this work, LLORONA. So overall, I'm very, very pleased with the way this looks and sounds for purposes of this Criterion release. Now, continuing on with the Criterion release supplements, we have a number of supplements which can be found in the supplements menu when you put the disc into the machine. And so what are those supplements? So first off, we have a discussion, a one-on-one interview discussion with the director, Jayro Bustamante. And this is called LLORONA, or Magical Realism is a Lifestyle. And this is an interview with a director on the film LLORONA, and indeed also on other works and points of reference with regard to his body of work, his filmography, which can be said to have a sort of contextual significance vis-a-vis various themes that are found within this particular LLORONA going forward. This is an interview described as being from the year 2022, approximately 28 minutes. Now, as I've mentioned before, this is my first time to watch this film, and indeed, this is my first time to watch a work of Bustamante, and therefore, from my vantage point, watching an interview like this gave me so much of an introduction into his work, and also so much of an introduction into the specific historical and social significant points that he was considering when making this work, and also how those points have a relevance in terms of how he treats certain social commentary and historical points found in his previous works as well. So he talks here about this concept of, or this philosophy or mode of cinema storytelling or presentation, magic realism, and how this is, from his vantage point, to how something that he employs in telling his stories, such as this film LLORONA, in the various, say, situations involving nature or the application of nature in a quote-unquote unreal or in an unreal way, but is still endeavoring to be consistent in an organic and faithful way to the fundamental drive of this story. So this is a very important thing as well, which is linked also to how he views history, modern history, Guatemala, and this idea of a revolution, protests, civil war, and this idea of agrarian reforms, this idea of class structures, also class divides, and also indigenous populations, and the authoritarian dictatorships, and how certain populations within Guatemala were persecuted and indeed subjected to violence and indeed acts of attempted and indeed realized genocide. So this is very much part of the actual, or the handling and the consciousness, if you will, of Bustamante's work, as he describes it here, and of course, LLORONA being a very prime and direct and quite impactful example of this type of handling or concern. And this is also this idea too of the depiction of peoples, and also the depiction of legends and folklore and storytelling, the idea of the La Llorona in question, and also how Bustamante got a lot of inspiration from a number of film. He describes too about the films that he watched and films that gave him inspiration in terms of this work, and also his creating a sense of excitement within him to want to be a filmmaker, to pursue filmmaking, or just the excitement or joy or potential of cinema. So he mentions, for example, "Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down" as one subject. He also mentions the work of Haneke or Indiana Jones films, and this sort of thing, or the works of Italian neorealism, etc. So he also talks about his endeavors to create films, his production company efforts, and also the ways in which his films try to deal with certain what he calls insults, quote unquote insults of various aspects or groups or peoples within the society of Guatemala. And so in his past films, he talks about the concerns he had in his films involving certain aspects of culture and also certain aspects of sexual identity. And then now here in La Llorona, he's talking about in a political context, in terms of communism, or in terms of also the way in which authoritarianism is linked with the sense of treatment or handling of legends, La Llorona in question. So very, very fascinating discussion indeed. And again, I point this out for purposes of my own learning and education about his works and also this film. It's very, very helpful indeed. He talks too about the aspects of supernatural horror and how this is very much ingrained in or part of the stylings of La Llorona, the visual aesthetics. He cites also as an example of reference example or point of, say, inspiration. He cites a film like The Shining, which I think is a really interesting link as well. He also mentions the film like The Witch or Dracula, and also he mentions certain Spanish paintings from the 1600s. And then also he speaks too about certain voices or instruments that are used as part of the soundtrack or the soundscape, which is also very important. So overall, this is a very, very fascinating and helpful and enlightening conversation with Jayro Bustamante. Again, it's approximately 28 minutes. Please check it out if you haven't already. But that's not all, because continuing on with the supplements that are included with this Criterion release, we also have a documentary, which is approximately 44 minutes. And this is described as being from the year 2022. And it's called Making La Llorona, The Cries of a Wounded People. And this is described as being by Jayro Bustamante from his production company, La Casa de Producción. And it is another fascinating behind-the-scenes look at the making, the production of this really compelling, complex work from Jayro Bustamante and also other participants, cast members, crew members of this work, including, for example, the director of photography aspect as well, Nicolas Wong Diaz, or Nico Wong as he's referred to here, and also some elements of the storytelling and the history behind that forms the foundational basis for the storytelling work, the Civil War strife in Guatemala from the 1960s onwards. And this idea of how to create a mood or spirit or attitude or philosophy encapsulated in his work as a means of mourning the missing, or honoring the dead, or somehow commemorating the memory of those who have been lost. And not just commemorating and honoring these people, but also somehow trying to establish a sense of capturing justice in the areas in which injustices have occurred. So this is, I think, a very fascinating, again, dynamic way in which I think the filmmakers in question, or Jayro Bustamante and company, are trying to, in essence, grapple with this sense of history in the currency of the moment. So here we also have some comments that we heard Bustamante speak about in the earlier interview. For example, what he refers to as the so-called 3 quote-unquote insults in the context of what he regards through the sweep of, say, an understanding of Guatemalan society and culture. and this idea of these insults being the points by which his works have been figured. And La Llorona figures into this context or discussion with regard to communist or communism. So the other insults having to refer to a sort of indigenous persons, and then also with regard to sexuality and sexual identity, and then now this with regard to sort of a political arena in the respective coming. But of course, it becomes a very complex, dynamic arena discussion itself in the context of works like Llorona. And also, we have in this documentary, in addition to some aspects of the behind-the-scenes making, we have the context of the meaning of the phrase or the word La Llorona, and also, as discussed before, this idea of the folk tale or the story or the myth being not just the basis for an outline or a reminder of the tragedy and loss of people and their family members and the victims, but also in a means by which the filmmakers are trying to use this image, this powerful story, this myth, this figure as a means for, as I said before, or as the filmmakers have said before, establishing a sense of justice. And so here, for these and other reasons, I think we have another fantastic, fascinating behind-the-scenes look through the lens of Bustamante and company, through this great making of documentary, The Cries of a Wounded People. So please check this out if you can as well. It's a very, very enlightening watch indeed. And that's not all, because then the Criterion supplements conclude with what's described as being a trailer. And this is a trailer which is described here from 2020. It is approximately 7 minutes. And this is a very fascinating trailer because it's described as a trailer, but it could also be said to be a type of music video using the music from Gabi Moreno. And also it can be described as being, I understand it, an alternate footage or deleted footage type of reel, because the supplemental menu describes this as being utilizing footage that was specially shot or otherwise not integrated into the film itself. So we're getting different takes or different perspectives or different types of impressions in this reel, which therefore serves, I think, multi-purposes, right? It serves as an alternate takes reel in a certain spiritual sense of that term, and also a music video, and also a trailer for the film. And so we're getting all these moods and impressions and stylistic devices, and also a really cool thing in which, or a really neat way in which the marketing materials are being produced. It serves multi-functions, multi-purposes in this age of, say, understanding the need and celebrating the existence of supplemental material. So this is in many ways the ultimate supplemental material, in the sense that it serves many functions at the same time. Really interesting, intriguing way to market the film in this way. Very, very fascinating, very catchy, and indeed very intriguing indeed. So this is the trailer, which is part of the supplements package, and then rounds out this particular release in terms of the supplements. So it's a very interesting supplemental package. Again, from my perspective, watching this film for the first time, I learned so much, and there are many things that I have still much to learn about, I understand. So this is a great jumping off point, I think, for someone like myself, who is, again, coming at this material for the first time and being introduced to this world and to this filmmaker. It would, of course, been very interesting to see more supplements. I mean, the more supplements, the better. Would have been interesting also to have seen a commentary track, etc. But with those comments notwithstanding, I think we're getting, well, at least from my perspective anyway, I got a really well-rounded look and feel and take into this world of La Llorona and the filmmakers involved. So I learned so much from this set of supplements. Now, to continue on with a quick discussion of the presentation, the Criterion packaging, again, I've taken the liberty of removing the insert here. It's a fold-out insert, but as you can see, it does carry on the sense of the artistic motif that we find in this cover art design. And wow, what a cover art design this is. If you look very closely, it has this way of looking like one type of image, but then if you look at it from a different angle or different perspective, you can make out different images that come alive through the art rendering. A very interesting way to depict certain, say, scenes or ideas or maybe even characters that can be said to be very integral to the plot dynamics of La Llorona. Very fascinating work indeed. So here we have art directors Eric Skillman and Sarah Habibi, illustration Ruaus. And so a very, very fascinating look here. And again, I love the way this is integrated into the fold-out design as well. So well done for being able to do this. I think it's really quite excellent indeed. And I should say too that this is the fold-out. And as I said, I'm not a big fan of the fold-out. I wish that Criterion would have staple booklets for all of its releases. But oh well, c'est la vie, as it were. And that's okay, well, because we get an essay, a great essay. Again, another wonderful place of learning for someone like myself, who has, again, being introduced to this material, into this world. This essay is by Francisco Goldman, Turning Horror into Light. Very, very intriguing, and so filled with a lot of intelligent points, well written. Again, going into the space of the specifics of the film itself, Bustamante's work, the way in which this is integrating history and society and culture with the aspects of the supernatural, the horror, the dread, the angst, in the complete package that this film is. So, another fantastic essay. Please check it out if you can. Once again, my strong recommendation would be to watch the film first and then read the essay, because the essay does go into plot specifics, and I think it is written from the vantage point of assuming that the reader will have seen the film first. So watch the film first, and then after you have done so, you can turn to this great essay, Francisco Goldman's essay, which is called Turning Horror into Light. Well worth your time. It's so fascinating and great read. And so with that, my dear friends, this is the Criterion release from 2022 of this work, La Llorona, Jayro Bustamante. So I enjoyed this very much. I learned so much. It was a very enthralling viewing experience from top to bottom, and so many points of learning indeed. So well done, Criterion, for being able to include this into the physical media catalog this year. And I look forward to many a rewatch for many years to come of this work, which is La Llorona. All right, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great movies. So until the next video, my dear friends, stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.